Dublin is in flames after a shocking stabbing led to riots on the streets. Irish officials and news media are blaming it all on the far right and anti-immigrant rhetoric. Their solution? Techno-authoritarianism. Welcome to America Uncovered. I'm Chris Chappell. The U.S. gets heated over debates on topics like immigration, but it certainly isn't the only one. It turns out Ireland does as well. A horrific stabbing took place outside a school in Dublin at Parnell Square East last week. And as a result, protests turned into riots. People burned public transportation, looted stores. Some vandalized police cars by catching them on fire or smashing them. And they clashed with the police. Many were seen throwing objects and shooting fireworks at riot police. As a result, Dublin saw the most riot police ever deployed in Irish state history. Kind of looks like Seattle's 2020 Summer of Love. According to reports, a man in his 40s or 50s used a large knife to attack students outside a school. Police say that 3 children, 2 aged 5 and 1 6, along with a woman in her 30s, were injured. The alleged perpetrator was stopped by a Brazilian fast food driver who used his helmet to smash the man in the head. Bystanders soon followed, kicking and pinning the man down before police arrived. Now, police did not comment on the nationality of the detained man, but word is he's a naturalized Irish citizen of Algerian descent. According to the New York Times, unconfirmed reports that he was an Algerian migrant quickly began circulating in anti-immigration and far-right groups. The attack comes at a time when Ireland is already dealing with several immigration issues. There's already been mounting tensions over Ireland's accommodation of migrants. According to Fox News, Ireland has seen an unprecedented spike in illegal migrants and asylum seekers over the last number of years, a large portion of whom have been put into temporary accommodation by the state and given welfare. It comes as the nation faces a chronic housing shortage, along with a spiraling homeless crisis and cost of living crisis. These things help fuel sentiment that Ireland is full and that Irish politicians are deaf towards the needs of everyday Irish citizens. Recent high-profile crimes committed by immigrants only added to the problem. Last month, a man of Iraqi descent was jailed for life after murdering 2 gay men in Ireland. And earlier this month, a Slovak man was found guilty of murdering an Irish teacher. It's so interesting to see how selective media outlets are about the ethnic backgrounds of criminals, which could explain why people in the Dublin riots threatened journalists and claimed the media wasn't telling the truth about immigration. Many, like former UFC fighter Conor McGregor, are very frustrated with what they see as an unchecked influx of immigrants. McGregor blames the Irish government for allowing foreign murderers in and said he felt ashamed to be Irish because of it. All this frustration could explain why the Dublin riots got as bad as they did. Unfortunately for Irish citizens, the riot presented the perfect opportunity for politicians and the mainstream media to bash what they call the far right and push for authoritarian solutions. More on that after the break. Welcome back. Anger against what some see as out-of-control migration exploded into riots after the knife attack on children last week in Dublin. And some Irish officials blamed the riots not on the guy who stabbed children, but on the far right.
We have a complete lunatic hooligan faction driven by far-right ideology.
Minister for Justice Helen McEntee likewise said that those involved were using the knife attack to wreak havoc and sow division and were nothing more than criminals and thugs. She warned that a thuggish and manipulative element must not be allowed to use an appalling tragedy to wreak havoc. The Irish president himself, Michael Higgins, said that the knife attack would be used or abused by groups with an agenda that attacks the principle of social inclusion is reprehensible and deserves condemnation by all those who believe in the rule of law and democracy. Mainstream media outlets gobbled up these comments like turkey at Thanksgiving dinner. They absolutely love stoking fears of the far right whenever they can. In covering the Dublin riots, the mainstream media highlighted the protesters were far right and anti-immigrant. Vice News was quick to point out how anti-foreigner tensions have been fanned by online influencers such as Irish MMA fighter Conor McGregor. It pointed to tweets from McGregor like when he said Ireland was at war the night before the riots. In the aftermath, McGregor tweeted that there is grave danger among us in Ireland that should never be here in the first place, and demanded change. Judging by how Vice News showed Conor McGregor's tweets, you might think he's all for violence and against immigration in Ireland. But that's not right. McGregor has said that he doesn't condone the riots, attacks on first responders, or looting. Additionally, he said that his criticism against Ireland's immigration policies should not be mistaken as an attack on many hard-working, honest families who migrate to Ireland and contribute. What McGregor wants is a functional border policy that welcomes people without burdening average citizens. What he complains about is how Ireland has overstretched itself welcoming immigrants who don't contribute to society, or worse yet, bring harm to others. Now that seems completely fair and reasonable for him and others to want. And yet the mainstream media and progressive politicians all too often assume that if you raise concerns about migrants being let in and criticize immigration policies, that you're either far right or you're anti-immigrant. They'll oftentimes say things like, "We're a country of migrants," or "We welcome those fleeing from harsh environments," in response to complaints. But there are genuine negative consequences to unrestrained and uncontrolled immigration. Sweden, once proud of its tradition of welcoming migrants and refugees, has had to face the tough reality that managing such a large number has become too much to handle. As a result, they're not nearly as welcoming as they once were. The same goes for other countries like Denmark, who are shooting for 0 asylum seekers. This in turn has led to the quote-unquote far right winning Europe's immigration debate by having more countries on board with stricter border policies. And no, I'm not being far right for pointing all this out. Even progressive sanctuary cities in the US, like New York City, are so overwhelmed that they're willing to pay to fly migrants out of their state or even out of the country. As it turns out, it's a lot easier to claim that you're caring and welcoming until you actually have to bear the costs for doing so. Using labels like far right and anti-immigrant really don't help provide any nuance. In fact, one has to wonder if people even know what far right and anti-immigrant even mean anymore. You can be pro-immigrant and still want a functional immigration system with some restraints. But who cares about nuance when you can use a good crisis for a power grab, which is exactly what Irish politicians are doing. In response to the riots, the Irish Prime Minister said the Irish government would accelerate the passage of 2 already proposed pieces of legislation. The first would introduce facial recognition technology for police, now expanded to include acts of riots and violent disorder. The second one is even scarier. It's called the Criminal Justice Bill. It empowers the police to prosecute so-called online promoters of hate. The new law will introduce specific legislation to tackle hate crimes, which it considers intentional or reckless communication and behavior that is likely to incite violence or hatred, establishing penalties of up to 5 years in prison. This updates Ireland's existing 1989 hate speech law, which is already vague enough. That law makes it an offense to communicate threatening, abusive, or insulting material that is likely to stir up hatred. It doesn't even have to be hateful, just that it's likely to stir up hatred, based on the government's discretion of what it considers hateful. The 1989 law at least made it possible for people to defend themselves by claiming they had no intent of spreading hatred. The new law changes this, making one liable for a hate crime even if they did claim they did not intend it. For Irish officials, it isn't enough to just dismiss the intent of spreading hate. The new law also makes preparing or possessing materials likely to incite violence or hatred an offense. If you're determined to be in possession of hateful materials not intended for personal use, you're presumed guilty. This just screams Orwellian totalitarianism, because if you know how governments work, you know that the power to criminalize what authorities consider hate can be easily abused. To no one's surprise, politicians, even Irish ones, really don't mind this. According to the Irish Prime Minister, I think it's now very obvious to anyone who might have doubted us that our incitement to hatred legislation is just not up to date. It's not up to date for the social media age, and we need that legislation through within a matter of weeks. And I'm sure the power they use to go after so-called promoters of hate will never, ever be abused. And here's a video I want you to check out. It's about how American sanctuary cities are struggling with a mass influx of illegal immigrants. And while you're at it, smash that orange button to support America Uncovered on Patreon. Don't worry, that doesn't count as vandalism. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. Thanks for watching America Uncovered.